It's time for one of my favorite crops to be harvested, broccoli. I planted 38 broccoli plants on April 27th, and just 62 days later, on June 18th, they were ready to be harvested. I prepped a saltwater bath to put the broccoli heads into. The salt water helps kill any of the cabbage caterpillars that might be hiding up inside the head that we can't see. I've also had problems with earwigs hiding in the heads of my broccoli, and the salt water does a good job at eliminating them as well. I know my broccoli is ready to be harvested when the outer florets on the main head are just starting to loosen, but all the buds are still quite tight. Using my pruners, I cut the stem about 3 inches below the head. I do this because this section of the stem is still tender and perfect for broccoli soup. One thing I found about my spacing of my broccoli this year is that the center got just a little bit too crowded, and I didn't get as large of heads as I would have ideally liked in the center. Next year, I plan to remove 1 row of broccoli to hopefully free up the center and get larger heads overall. Some people leave their broccoli plants in the ground to side shoot. I, however, don't. I will be removing these plants after this harvest. The reason for that is that the broccoli side shoots aren't productive enough for the space they're using. Because broccoli goes in before my last frost date and is out only a month into my growing season, I am left with over 100 frost-free days to plant in something else. That's lots of time for some quick winter squashes, some peppers, maybe a couple root vegetables. That will be much more productive for me than the broccoli side shoots could ever be. In total, I ended up with 15.86 pounds of broccoli. As a reminder, my goal for broccoli this year was 21 pounds. Therefore, I fell short of my goal by 5.14 pounds. The average head weight was 0.41 pounds. I had an estimated average head weight of half a pound, and I think this difference came down to the smaller heads I got in the center of the bed where my spacing was just too tight. To prepare the broccoli for the freezer, I start by removing the florets from the main stalk. If you want to avoid getting little broccoli pieces everywhere, don't take your knife all the way through the floret. Just cut the stalk and then pull the florets apart. You won't end up with all the little broccoli buds all over your counter. I'm also chopping up this stalk because I will use this tender part of the stalk to make broccoli soup once my potato harvest is in. To preserve my broccoli, I steam blanch it, meaning I use the heat from steam to blanch the broccoli instead of dumping the broccoli in boiling hot water. I find I end up with a better finished product doing it this way. The broccoli doesn't seem to get as full of water that then freezes once it's put into the freezer. I put the broccoli into my steamer, which is a stock pot with boiling water on the bottom and a fine mesh strainer on top. The bottom of the strainer doesn't touch the hot water. Securing the lid on top, I let the broccoli steam for about 3 minutes, tossing it halfway through. Once the broccoli is done steam blanching, I dump it into a strainer in a sink full of cold water to stop the cooking process. I leave it in the strainer for about 3 minutes, and then I drain as much water out of the broccoli as possible. I take the broccoli that's finished being blanched and has finished cooling and draining, and I lay it out on a clean countertop. You can see I have a fan set up blowing air onto the broccoli. I do this so that I can get the broccoli as dry as possible before I put it into the freezer bags. When it comes to freezing as a method of preservation, you want whatever you're freezing, vegetable, fruit, to be as dry as possible. Extra moisture when you're freezing something is just going to lead to a lower quality product when you go to use it. Because I want to be able to decide how much broccoli I take out of the freezer at one time, I'm starting by freezing the broccoli in single layers. that are being separated by freezer bags. This will allow the broccoli to freeze as individual florets instead of freezing all together as a clump. So when I go to make dinner, I can just take out a couple handfuls of broccoli if that's all I want for that meal. Because I have so much broccoli here and I only have 2 pans, I'm using the Ziploc bags that the broccoli will eventually go into to divide the broccoli into 2 individual single layers. That way I can fit more into my freezer at once. The broccoli stems that I chopped up, I'm not going through the process of laying them out and freezing them so that they'll be individuals. I'm freezing those just in big gallon bags. When it's time for me to make my soup, I'm gonna take it all out, so I don't need to have the ability to take individual chunks out. Using a straw, I suck the air out of the bag. The broccoli stem is done and will be in the freezer waiting for me to make soup. The next morning, I pull the broccoli florets out of the freezer and start putting them into the gallon Ziploc bags. You can see how I can just grab the individual florets as I'm filling the bag. That's exactly what I wanted to have happen. As I close the Ziploc bags, I stick a straw in there again to be able to suck any of the air I can out of the bag so that the broccoli stays as fresh as possible for as long as possible. In total, I ended up with 5 gallon bags of broccoli florets for the 2025 broccoli season.